Welcome back to the deep dive. It's genuinely great to have you with us again today.
Yeah, really glad you're here with us. We've got a pretty heavy one today.
We do. We're continuing our journey through the AI Futures series, and I mean, today really represents a massive shift in the whole narrative.
It's a huge pivot.
Right. We are turning the page to episode 19 of this serialized analysis by Jafar Humayun, and the title alone, I mean, I literally had to stop and just stare at my screen for a minute.
The credit seizure.
The credit seizure, exactly. And just hearing that phrase, it sounds, I don't know, it sounds violent, like a medical emergency or
It
something.
does it. It has that punch to it.
But as we, really got into the reading, it became clear that this isn't about chaos in the streets. It's about something much quieter and, honestly, arguably much scarier.
It is. But before we even touch the mechanics of this seizure, we have to reestablish the framing that Humayun insists on for this entire project. You remember the golden rule for this?
Oh, yeah. AI Futures is not a framework. It's a framework.
Right. We aren't looking at isolated tech trends here. We're not talking about cool new gadgets. We are looking at a systemic overhaul of reality, a complete rewrite of the operating system.
Absolutely. And to sort of orient ourselves, we should probably touch briefly on where we just came from. So in the previous installment, episode 18, which was called The Forex Drain, we looked at how capital physically leaves a country.
The outbound flow, yeah.
Right. We talked about how replacing domestic salaries with, international AI tokens creates this massive outbound stream of money. Basically, nations that rely on importing intelligence end up bleeding capital.
That was the external side of it. That was the money leaving the building. Today, with the credit seizure, we are turning the camera inward. We're looking at the internal arrest. But, and this is crucial for you listening right off the bat, we need to set the exact right tone here. When you hear credit seizure, where does your mind immediately go?
Well, my brain goes straight to 2008. The Big Short. Guys screaming on trading floors, red arrows on the news, people carrying cardboard boxes out of banks.
The dramatic crash.
Yes.
Yeah, totally.
But that's the movie version. Humayun is very clear here. This is not a panic-driven crash. It's not a sudden market drop. It is structural paralysis.
Paralysis, which implies the body is still there, right? It can't move anymore.
Precisely. It is the silence that happens when you delete the fundamental assumptions that the global financial system is built on. Specifically, the link between human labor and liquidity.
So we're talking about what happens when the engine doesn't blow up, but it just stops turning because the fuel line was cut.
We're looking at the second-order financial effects of wage decoupling, and this is exactly why the medical terminology in the title is so accurate. A seizure isn't an external attack. It's an internal misfiring of signals.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Because if this doesn't start with no bank runs, no red alerts, how does it start? The source material describes it as a quiet onset.
It starts with the mundane. It starts with the boring stuff, missing paychecks. We aren't talking about a singular Black Tuesday event here.
We are talking about a string of quiet layoffs, non-renewed contracts, roles that just fade away.
The source actually puts it in a really interesting way. It says, AI replaced the person, but it does not replace the payday for the community.
And that right there is the core of the wage-to-debt mechanism. Think about how our entire financial architecture is built. Why does a bank give you a mortgage? Why does a lender approve a car loan?
Because they assume I have a job, or at least that I'll have income coming in every 2 weeks to pay them back.
Correct, but let's go a layer deeper. They don't just trust you. They trust the predictability of your labor. The entire system relies on the predictability of recurring human income to service debt. That is the actual collateral.
Wow. So my ability to show up at 9 a.m. for the next 30 years is what backs the loan?
Exactly. Your future labor is the asset. Now, what happens when you transition from wages paid to households to tokens paid to servers?
Well, the money is still being spent by the company, but it's going to a cloud provider. It's not going to a checking account in the suburbs.
And that is income decoupling. The efficiency remains. The output remains. In fact, the output probably goes up.
Sure, companies get more productive.
But the local circulation vanishes. There are no salaries, no tips, no commissions circulating locally. And the result, as Humayun describes it, is a silence where wages used to be.
That silence sounds terrifyingly peaceful. It's not a protest. It's just an empty main street.
It creates a vacuum. And this triggers what the source calls the sequential deletion of assumptions, or conditional economic logic. It's a domino effect, but again, playing out in slow motion.
Let's walk through those dominoes, because I think people assume if they lose their job, that's their personal problem. But the source says this becomes everyone's problem very quickly.
Step one is household friction. This is simple subtraction. Rent falls behind.
Yeah.
Debt service falls behind. And the source really emphasizes this. This isn't due to luxury overspending.
Right. It's not avocado toast.
It's not people buying too many flat-screen TVs. It's just that the income isn't there to service the basic friction of life.
Which leads right into step 2, credit freezes.
This is where the institutional machinery starts to jam. As defaults rise, because remember, the wages are gone, traditional risk models start to fail. Banks run on algorithms that look at history.
And history says people generally pay their bills.
Right. But if the people part of the equation is removed, then the pay their bills part vanishes. The banks look at the landscape and realize the old math of recurring wages just doesn't apply anymore. So what do?
They pull back, they turtle up.
They freeze. And the scary part is, even if you are a healthy borrower,
Like, say I still have my job and I'm doing okay.
you might still face a frozen credit market because the liquidity pool is drying up globally. The bank enters a mode of extreme risk aversion because the fundamental premise of lending mass employment is shaking. If they can't trust the broader labor market, they stop lending to everyone.
Man. And that brings us to step 3, which is asset cracking. This is where it hits the things we own.
Housing dips first. It has to, because demand softens. If fewer people have the wage predictability to sign a 30-year mortgage, housing prices must come down.
And then equities follow. Retirement funds begin to shrink.
But notice the phrasing Humayun uses. This happens without a singular headline event.
It's just a slow, grinding erosion, like watching a tire slowly lose air.
Perfect analogy. And this step 4 brings it right down to the street level. Business collapse.
This is what I call the coffee shop problem.
Yes. Small businesses are the collateral damage of automation here. If you run a coffee shop, a dry cleaner, a local boutique, your business model depends entirely on a customer base of humans with disposable wages.
And if that customer base has been automated or outsourced or erased, your business fails. You can't sell a latte to a chatbot.
You cannot. And this is exactly where the paralysis sets in. The source explicitly says the system didn't break down in a panic. It just stopped functioning. It's like the gears just aren't touching each other anymore.
That is the literal definition of structural paralysis. But here is where it gets really interesting and honestly super confusing if you're just casually reading the news.
The divergence.
Yes, the source talks about a misleading calm. It points out this massive contradiction. Corporate earnings look fine. Margins are growing. Tech stocks are soaring to all-time highs. If the economy is seizing up, why are the companies doing so incredibly well?
That is critical to understand. You have to look at the incentive structure. Where's the money actually going?
Mm.
In the old model, the sort of Henry Ford model, a profitable company hired more people, which put money into the community.
Right, the classic rising tide lifts all boats idea.
But in an AI-driven economy, that link is completely severed. Profits don't feed payroll anymore. They feed 3 specific things: stock buybacks, automation R&D, and executive payouts.
Oh, and server farms. Lots of server farms.
Yes. And Humayun calls these digital vaults.
Digital vaults, meaning the money's being made, but it's locked up?
It's locked away from the real economy. The system runs hotter in terms of corporate efficiency and margin. Companies are more profitable than ever because they don't have labor costs. But the system runs colder in terms of community velocity.
Velocity meaning how fast money changes hands out in the real world.
Exactly. Money is stuck in the corporate layer. It's not flowing down to the street. It's a split reality. If you own the stock, you're seeing record highs. If you rely on a paycheck, you're looking at a desert.
That divergence creates such a dangerous illusion. It's like the dashboard says we're going 100 miles an hour, but the wheels have fallen off the car.
Precisely. And this leads us to expand the scope a bit. We've talked about households and local businesses, but the source material takes a wider view, looking at the global impact. It specifically zeroes in on the global south as the first to break.
This is a really tough but super necessary part of the analysis. Developing economies are often the most tied to labor arbitrage.
We're talking about BPO, business process outsourcing, call centers, data entry, coding shops. The source calls this exportable cognition.
Which is exactly what the current wave of AI is built to target.
Yes. When that gets automated, those contracts vanish overnight. Workers return home jobless. And remittances money, sent back from workers abroad, those dry up too. But it's worse than just unemployment. Local currencies duckle because that massive inflow of foreign capital just stops.
The dollars literally stop coming in.
And this demonstrates a crucial point. That growth vanished not because of government mismanagement or local corruption. It wasn't bad policy. They failed because the economic model itself was deprecated.
Deprecated. That's a software term, like an old version of an app that just isn't supported by the new operating system anymore.
And that is exactly what human labor becomes in this scenario, unsupported legacy code.
Wow. And that brings us into what the source calls the fiscal feedback loop. We're shifting from household distress to institutional suffocation. What happens to the government in this scenario?
Well, let's just look at the raw math. Governments run on taxes, and the primary source of tax revenue, directly or indirectly, is human labor. Income tax, payroll tax, consumption tax when people buy things.
So if AI replaces the human, the tax base shrinks.
Drastically. You have a shrinking tax base at the exact same moment you have a pension crisis. Pension funds become severely underfunded because market participation thins out. So the government is getting much less money in, right, as the demand for social safety nets absolutely explodes.
And this leads to what Humayun calls structural austerity.
I need to be really specific about this distinction. Usually when we hear the word austerity, we think of a political choice.
Right. Politicians arguing over budgets, deciding to tighten the belt.
But in this context, austerity is not a choice based on ideology. It is a structural necessity. You cannot spend money you do not have, and when the global credit markets are freezing, you cannot borrow it either.
So what does that actually look like on the ground?
It looks like deferred infrastructure maintenance, bridges not getting fixed, frozen hiring in the public sector, severe service breakdowns in schools and hospitals, increased public obligations met with sharply declining revenue.
The source puts it so vividly, the distress moves from households to institutional suffocation. It's like the government itself is just running out of oxygen.
It creates a state where the institutions we rely on simply stall. They don't crash in a fiery spectacle. They just become functionally unable to fulfill their mandates.
So naturally, as you're listening to this, you're asking, what do we do? Or rather, what do governments try to do? The source discusses the failure of legacy playbooks. It compares the 2008 problem to the 2030 problem.
This is where we see the mechanical gap. Think about 2008, or even the pandemic responses. What was the government playbook?
Cut interest rates, send out stimulus checks, subsidize industries, print money.
And those tools worked, more or less, because the crisis was a pause in demand. The goal was to bridge the gap until people could get back to work. It was a temporary bridge over a temporary hole.
But you're saying that bridge goes nowhere now.
Exactly. You cannot use that legacy playbook here. You cannot stimulate demand for labor that has been structurally integrated into the machine.
That is such a heavy concept. You can't stimulate demand for a job that a piece of software is doing for practically zero marginal cost.
Correct. You cannot restore demand once automation has consumed it entirely. If a massive corporation has replaced its entire customer service department with an AI agent, the central bank lowering interest rates by 0.5% won't make them hire those people back. The job is gone structurally, not cyclically.
So the old tools rates, stimulus, subsidies, they're useless.
They face severe diminishing returns, like pushing on a string. The source calls the resulting state ambient exhaustion.
Ambient exhaustion. That feels very different from a panic. Panic is sharp. It's pure adrenaline. Exhaustion is just, it's slow.
It defines a state where the entire system is out-optimized beyond the reach of 20th century monetary tools. It's the feeling of running a race where the finish line keeps moving further away from you. The pain creates a sensation that is endless and exhausting rather than sharp and sudden.
You know, throughout this entire deep dive, we've been very careful with our language. We haven't used words like apocalypse or collapse. We've specifically used seizure, paralysis, stalling. Why is that distinction so important for you listening to this?
Because language dictates how we react. If you think it's a traditional crash, you hide your money and wait for the bounce back. You wait for the recovery. But if you recognize it as a model deprecation, you realize there is no bounce back to the old way.
It's a permanent structural shift.
It is the vital recognition that the bloodstream of the economy, which is income, has fundamentally changed its chemical makeup.
The source uses a really haunting image for that. It says the system reveals what happens when income disappears, leaving behind a body that is warm but no longer alive.
That is the essence of liquidity narrowing and structural decoupling. The structures are all still there. The banks, the stock markets, the government buildings, they are standing tall. But the life force that animated them, the circular flow of wages and consumption, has been arrested.
It really forces you to rethink what an economy actually is. We tend to think it's the stock market graph or the GDP number. But this analysis makes it clear the economy is the flow, It's the movement. And if that movement stops,
Then the structure just becomes a monument to a past era, institutional stalling.
this has been an incredibly deep one today. We've covered a lot of heavy terminology: institutional stalling, model deprecation, liquidity narrowing, structural decoupling. It feels like we are basically building a new vocabulary for a world that is just starting to come into focus.
And that is the entire point of AI Futures, to give us the language to describe these changes before they completely overwhelm us. We aren't predicting the end of the world here. We are describing the end of a very specific economic arrangement.
And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a thought to mull over on your own. If our entire financial and social worth for the last century has been tied to our labor, our ability to take on debt because of our predictability as workers, what happens to human identity when that is decoupled? Who are we when the economy no longer needs our friction to run?
That is the exact question we have to face next. Because if the economic contract is fundamentally altered, the social contract can't be far behind.
And that is the perfect setup for where we are going. Next in AI Futures, we're going to look at episode 20, which is titled The Fraying of Order. The core question is, what happens when the social contract meets the reality of the algorithm?
That is going to be a crucial conversation. We're moving from the bank account directly to the street.
I really can't wait to get into it. For now, take some time to digest all of this. Stay tuned.
Stay curious.
Stay systemic.